Shocking news. Hamilton handed 10-second penalty for track limits in Miami Sprint. Stay until the end to hear his explosive statement. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The Miami Sprint race had barely drawn to a close when the paddock atmosphere shifted in a way so jarring, so electrically charged, that not even the thunder of V6 engines nor the staccato flashes of photographers could suppress the rising tension. The announcement hit like a sledgehammer, a 10-second time penalty handed to Lewis Hamilton for multiple track limits infringements. Just like that, the P4 finish he had fought tooth and nail to secure evaporated, and he plummeted to a gut-wrenching P8. For any other driver, it might have been a footnote. For Hamilton, after one of his most aggressive, spirited, and precision-driven performances of the season, it felt like a personal attack. An insult disguised as regulation. This wasn't a messy race. Hamilton had delivered one of the cleanest drives we've seen from him since he donned Ferrari red. Every overtake was meticulously calculated, every defensive maneuver executed with a steeliness that defined his title years. He had clawed his way past Fernando Alonso, muscled his way through George Russell with nothing but sheer determination and perfect timing, and even closed in on Sergio Perez's rear wing in the dying laps, dragging a still temperamental SF25 beyond its limits. But as the final checkered flag waved and the adrenaline began to settle, a quiet storm began to brew in Hamilton's eyes, one that the steward's ruling would violently awaken. The mood changed instantly. Hamilton didn't celebrate. There was no wave to the crowd, no acknowledgement of the camera crews desperately trying to capture his reaction. He remained seated in the car longer than usual, his helmet still on, visor down, hands motionless on the wheel. When he finally rose, the look on his face, clenched jaw, furrowed brow, eyes locked straight ahead, told the entire story. He didn't need to say a word. Every mechanic around him, every member of the pit crew, knew exactly what he was feeling. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. And he wasn't just disappointed. He was furious. He walked past his engineer without a nod, past the cameras without a glance, straight to the rear of the garage. There he sat, not on a chair, but on the edge of a carbon fiber equipment crate, his helmet still on, his body tense like a bowstring pulled to its breaking point. The heat in the Miami air was oppressive, but it wasn't the climate that made the room feel suffocating. It was him. A singular presence exuding pressure like a collapsing star. A junior engineer approached him nervously, printout in hand, the official steward's bulletin outlining the violation. Hamilton took it, glanced at the top line, and without reading further, crumpled it in one hand and tossed it across the floor. A silence followed so dense you could hear the hydraulics humming inside the car. That, insiders say, was the moment it all fractured. Back in the team's briefing room, Fred Vasseur was waiting, alongside a visibly shaken strategy crew. Hamilton entered without knocking. Helmet off now, his curls still matted with sweat. He didn't sit. He stood over the table, scanning their expressions. They looked back at him, some with sympathy, others with quiet resignation. "I drove the race of my season," he began, his voice low but loaded with venom. "And they took it away from me. Not for crashing. Not for contact. Not for gaining a position unfairly. For going an inch over a white line on a corner exit when the car was sliding out of grip. You know what that tells me?" Nobody dared answer. "It tells me they're watching me differently. Every corner. Every move. Like I don't get the benefit of the doubt anymore. Like I don't belong here." Vasseur tried to keep control. "Lewis, I understand." "No you don't," Hamilton snapped, turning toward him. "You understand politics. You understand press conferences. But you don't understand what it feels like to give everything in a car that's trying to kill you on every lap and then be told it's not enough because you touched the curb twice too hard. I know what racing is. That wasn't racing judgment, that was political." One of the engineers attempted to interject, offering data overlays, suggesting it was a miscommunication between the sensors and race control, perhaps a calibration issue. Hamilton didn't even acknowledge him. "Spare me the excuses. Where were the warnings? Where was the black and white flag? Why is it that when Max runs wide it's hard racing, and when I do it, it's unsportsmanlike behavior? The rules aren't the same for everyone. And we all know it." Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. He was pacing now, every word gaining velocity. This isn't just about today. It's about every GP this year where I've had to babysit a car that fights me in every corner, with no stability, no predictability, no consistency. I've driven championship-winning cars. I know what control feels like. This is like herding a bull through a minefield. Then he paused, stared out the frosted glass toward the paddock, and spoke more quietly. I came to Ferrari to make history, to write the final chapter in something meaningful. But right now, it feels like I'm writing an obituary. Vasseur stood up, exhaling. Imola, he said. That's the reset point. The car will be different. The balance, the rear grip, the load transition, all of it. We're bringing you the machine you deserve. Hamilton looked at him. Long. Measured. Silent. You better, he replied. Because what wasn't being said in that room, but what everyone was thinking, is that this isn't sustainable. A driver of Hamilton's caliber doesn't accept injustice for long. He may absorb. He may endure. But he does not forget. And if the team doesn't deliver in Imola, the cracks in this relationship won't just deepen, they'll become irreparable. Outside the garage, the media was waiting. Cameras pointed at every exit. Reporters whispering theories. PR handlers strategizing damage control. But Hamilton didn't emerge. He stayed behind the curtain, behind the fury, letting the storm rage internally. A crafted statement was pushed out on social media. Polished, politically safe, emotionless. It was a facade. The real story was what hadn't been said. What couldn't be typed in 280 characters. What was burning behind his eyes when he looked at that steward's ruling and saw not justice, but injustice disguised in FA letterhead. And across the paddock, the reaction was sharp. Drivers were split. Norris said it was harsh but within the rules. Russell called it unfortunate timing. Verstappen avoided comment altogether. But off the record, mechanics from rival teams, even a few former champions, privately admitted, that's the kind of penalty that breaks trust. Because in Formula One, more than speed, more than skill, the greatest commodity is belief. Belief in the rules. Belief in your car. Belief in your team. And when that begins to erode, as it clearly is for Hamilton, the repercussions aren't just measured in seconds lost. They're measured in seasons. In championships. In legacies. And in Miami, beneath the lights, behind the glamour, in a sweltering garage filled with silence, we may have witnessed the beginning of a reckoning. One man. One moment. One penalty. And the spark of something that could either ignite redemption, or burn the whole dream to the ground. He didn't storm out of the garage. He didn't throw his gloves. He didn't curse into the radio or tear off his helmet in dramatic protest. When the penalty dropped, Lewis Hamilton didn't break composure. He became something far more dangerous. Focused, cold, and absolutely unshakable. By the time he arrived at the media pen, the room was already tense. Everyone had seen the timing sheets. Everyone had read the steward bulletin. Everyone knew the 10-second time penalty had dropped him from a career-defining drive to an anonymous midfield result. He had fought like a man possessed, making moves in places other drivers wouldn't dare, threading the car through impossible gaps, defending like a street fighter and attacking like a sniper. It was old-school Hamilton, clinical, ruthless, relentless. And now it had all been wiped away, because he ran a few centimeters wide under braking in one of the most unstable corners on the circuit. The cameras started recording the moment he arrived. Microphones flooded forward. But Hamilton didn't need a prompt. He looked straight into the main broadcast lens, and what came out wasn't rage, but something far more unsettling, calculated fury. It's beyond frustrating, he began, voice tight but deliberate. We keep hearing the same slogans every weekend. Let them race. Trust the drivers. Push to the limit. But apparently, the limit is defined by people who've never driven an F1 car at 320 kilometers per hour into a corner with a tailwind and two cars breathing down your neck. His tone was calm, but every word landed like a punch. No hyperbole. Just surgical precision. The kind of anger that isn't loud, it's lethal. I put everything into that drive. We had the wrong tire call early on, the rear was unstable through turns 8 and 9, and I still fought back into position. I made it stick. I went wheel to wheel, I pushed the limit, but I respected the racing. And I get 10 seconds for brushing the exit line at full throttle, with a car sliding underneath me like it's on stilts? Come on. Reporters tried to interject, citing the steward's reasoning, the GPS sensor data, the pre-race briefing reminders. Hamilton raised a hand gently, silencing the room without raising his voice. "You want data?" he said, eyes narrowing. "Here's your data. Show me where I gained time from those violations. Show me how cutting a corner by a few millimeters on a damp track gave me an advantage. While we're at it, let's pull up every lap where cars behind me were off track, cutting apexes, skipping chicanes, and not getting flagged. This isn't about track limits. It's about optics. It's about control. And it's getting embarrassing." And still, he wasn't done. Because then came the question that changed the entire mood. "Will you speak with the FIA directly?" He laughed. "Not with joy. With exhaustion. I've spoken to the FIA more times than I can count. I've been in this sport for nearly 2 decades. I've sat in their rooms. I've helped rewrite safety protocols. I've given them feedback after nearly every incident where judgment was needed. And you know what I've learned? They listen when it's convenient. When it fits the narrative. But when it's uncomfortable. When it exposes flaws in their structure or the inconsistencies in how they apply penalties. Suddenly everyone's reviewing the footage." A journalist timidly suggested that perhaps the stewards were just doing their job. "No," Hamilton replied. "They're doing a job. Not the job. The job is to ensure fair racing. The job is to interpret the spirit of the rules, not just the letter. The job is to recognize the difference between a genuine infringement and a moment of survival at the limit of physics. I'm not asking for favoritism, I'm demanding consistency. I'm demanding intelligence. And more than anything, I'm demanding respect, for us, the drivers. For the fans. For the sport." The paddock was frozen. No one breathed. No one blinked. Behind the scenes, the FIA scrambled. Emails were already being exchanged. Senior figures in the race director's office were reviewing radio communications, hoping to find context, justification, anything to neutralize the firestorm. Liberty Media executives were alerted. Sponsors began calling press offices, demanding clarification. Mercedes refused to release a statement immediately, choosing instead to let Hamilton's words hang in the air like smoke from a fire still burning. The reaction was instant. Drivers across the grid weighed in. Lando Norris called it harsh. Fernando Alonso, ever blunt, said, "If they did that to me, I'd be in Paris by now flipping tables." Even Charles Leclerc, typically guarded, posted a single line on his Instagram story: "That penalty made no sense." Social media went into overdrive. Clips of Hamilton's interview racked up millions of views. Fans dissected every frame of the onboard footage. A data analyst on YouTube recreated the alleged track limit infractions using 3D models and proved they had zero time gain. Petitions to overhaul stewarding protocols gained tens of thousands of signatures overnight. The FIA released a short, heavily sanitized statement the following morning. "We acknowledge the concerns raised and will review the application of track limit penalties as part of our ongoing commitment to transparency and fairness." It did little to slow the outrage. But Hamilton? He didn't retreat. He didn't soften his stance. 2 days later, he posted a full statement to his social channels, one that read more like a manifesto than a clarification. This sport was built by warriors. By fearless drivers who raced not to comply with painted lines, but to rewrite what was possible. "I race with respect. But I refuse to be a pawn in a game where the rules change depending on who's watching. Motorsport deserves better. The fans deserve better. We deserve better." The response was seismic. Dozens of former champions voiced support. Damon Hill, Mika Hakkinen, Nico Rosberg. Even Sebastian Vettel, long silent since retirement, posted, "I've said it before and I'll say it again, Lewis fights not just for himself, but for everyone on that grid." And through it all, Hamilton stayed silent. Focused. Waiting. Because he knew the next race wasn't just another Grand Prix. It was a stage. And this time, everyone would be watching, not just for performance, but for proof. Would you like to continue with the next Grand Prix weekend and how this tension spills over into on-track aggression and politics between teams? It unfolded in the underbelly of the paddock, far from the glare of television crews, beyond the reach of microphones and long lenses. A narrow corridor, dimly lit, half echoing with a distant hum of generators and the quiet rumble of rubber being packed away for freight. The Grand Prix was technically over, but the emotional wreckage still lingered, thick in the air. Mechanics moved with mechanical precision, their faces blank, their shoulders heavy. Inside that atmosphere, Charles Leclerc caught sight of Lewis Hamilton pacing alone, helmet under his arm, his gloves still on, knuckles white. Leclerc didn't hesitate. He broke away from his group and intercepted Hamilton in the tunnel that led to the driver's lounge. There were no cameras, no press officers, no entourage. Just two drivers, one furious, the other quiet. Leclerc placed a hand gently on Hamilton's shoulder, not assertive but grounding, and leaned in. The conversation lasted under 60 seconds, but the intensity in their body language painted an entire portrait. Hamilton, jaw clenched, eyes dark with disbelief, exhaled sharply through his nose. "It's always me," he muttered, loud enough that a nearby Red Bull technician heard him and turned. "No one else gets this." Leclerc didn't push back. He didn't offer a half-hearted defense of the stewards. He didn't play neutral. He just nodded, eyes full of something between resignation and solidarity. "I know," he said. There was nothing else. No hug. No pretense. Just that. Then Leclerc walked away, leaving Hamilton rooted to the spot, his fury still bottled, still boiling. Inside the post-race debrief, the mood shifted from simmering anger to full detonation. The room felt claustrophobic. The lights overhead cast a sterile glow, too bright, too artificial, illuminating every nervous glance, every tightened jaw. Data streams scrolled across the wall displays, telemetry charts overlaid with penalty flags, graphs that should have represented progress now read like an autopsy. Toto Wolff, the usually imperturbable figure at the center of Mercedes' command structure, stood at the head of the table, arms crossed tightly, jaw locked. He had dealt with a decade of high-pressure moments, but this felt different. The atmosphere wasn't just tense, it was volatile. He tried to de-escalate. His voice was low, steady, deliberate. "Lewis, we'll dissect the footage and telemetry. If there's evidence to challenge the stewards, we'll do it. You know that." Hamilton, standing at the opposite end of the room, didn't flinch. He didn't nod. He didn't acknowledge the olive branch. He exploded. "This isn't about data. This isn't about apex speeds or sector deltas," he said, voice rising, shaking with emotion. "This is about how I'm treated. Consistently. Repeatedly. Systemically. I give everything out there. I play by the book. And still, I'm the one getting hit." He paced back and forth in front of the screen, replaying the same corner sequence they'd all seen 100 times by now. If Max runs wide, it's aggressive. If Charles does it, it's hard racing. If I do it, it's unsporting. Why? He turned back toward the group. Why is it always me? Nobody spoke. Not the engineers. Not the strategists. Not even his performance coach. Some stared at their shoes. Others at their screens. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Angela Cullen, present that weekend at Hamilton's personal request, finally stepped forward. Her tone was quiet, calming, but firm. "You've faced worse than this. You've climbed through storms thicker than this. You know how to survive this." Hamilton looked at her, his eyes glistening, not with sadness, but with something harder, more primal. "I'm tired of surviving," he whispered. "I want to race. I want to win. I want to stop explaining myself every weekend like I'm guilty of something. I'm not asking for favors. I'm asking for fairness." Toto tried again, his voice now gentler. "Perception is difficult to manage, Lewis. We fight what we can with facts." But Lewis wasn't interested in diplomacy anymore. "Facts don't change bias," he snapped. "And bias is killing this sport. You can only be silent for so long before silence becomes complicity. We've been playing nice, hoping things shift. They won't. Not unless someone forces it. And I've had enough of waiting." Later that evening, as team personnel scrambled to coordinate the logistics of departure, and journalists raced to finalize their headlines, the digital world erupted. Social media became a battleground. The hashtag Justice for Lewis gained momentum so quickly that it overwhelmed algorithms and hit trending lists in over 40 countries. Within 90 minutes, Over 17 million tweets, reposts, comments, and reactions were logged across platforms. The online discourse fractured into furious camps, those who believed the penalty was harsh to the point of sabotage, and those defending the stewards' rigid enforcement of the rulebook. But even among the neutral, a consensus began to emerge, a discomfort with how often Hamilton found himself in this position. Penalized, questioned, isolated. Motorsport analysts were split. Sky's commentary team hesitated to take sides, citing unfortunate but necessary consistency, while rival broadcasters dissected frame-by-frame footage, pointing to nearly identical infractions committed by other drivers that went unpunished. Karun Chandok, usually measured in his assessments, called the ruling problematic and selective. Ted Kravitz went further. We've reached a point where the rules seem elastic for some and stone for others. Former champions added their voices. Nico Rosberg, speaking via satellite from Monaco, said, "There are patterns. You can't ignore them." Lewis has every right to feel targeted. Jenson Button admitted, "It's not just the penalties. It's how quick they are to arrive. Almost automatic." But it was Sebastian Vettel's appearance on German television that delivered the night's most piercing observation. F1 says it wants diversity. But treating your most successful black driver as if he's a problem to be managed, what does that say? And through it all, the FIA remained silent except for a boilerplate statement. Car 44 was found in breach of Article 33.3. Penalty assessed in accordance with Sporting Code. Case closed. No context. No explanation. No reflection. Inside his hotel room, Hamilton sat alone in the dim light. The screen of his iPad paused on the moment in turn 12 where his tires grazed the line. Not crossed it, not launched over it, but merely brushed it. The penalty that followed had cost him a podium. Maybe more. But what it really cost was harder to define. Trust. Faith. Will. He reached for his phone more than once to post something. He typed. He deleted. Again. And again. Then finally he spoke. Not to the world. Not into a camera. But into the silence. They don't want to see me rise. But I'm not done rising. Would you like the next chapter to follow Hamilton confronting FIA officials face-to-face, or a powerful press conference where he finally speaks his truth to the world? By the time the last golf cart zipped away and the lights around the Miami paddock began to dim, Lewis Hamilton had already sealed himself off from the outside world. He didn't wave. He didn't glance toward the media zone. There was no signature post-race grin, no fist bump with fans, no upload of an artfully filtered shot from Park Firm to Instagram. The image of the seven-time champion walking through the chaos, chin high and eyes forward, never materialized. Instead, there was only withdrawal. Deliberate. Total. Not out of weakness, but out of calculation. He canceled the remaining press interviews. Ignored sponsor obligations. Skipped team briefings. The comms team issued a muted no availability notice to waiting reporters. Then, nothing. No stories. No messages. No noise. Just a deep, deliberate silence. One so dense it felt heavier than any verbal statement he could have made. Silence has a tone. And this one sounded like defiance, laced with disappointment. Those who've known Hamilton for years saw it immediately for what it was. Not defeat, but protest. Not pettiness, but strategy. The kind of silence that speaks volumes, that draws more attention than any fiery quote or dramatic soundbite. He had been pushed to that edge before. 2016, 2021, moments where the system bent without breaking. But this was different. This was personal again. This was yet another wound opened, not by racing, but by bureaucracy. Within the walls of Ferrari's sprawling hospitality area, things were quieter than they should have been. The espresso machines still hissed. The staff still moved, efficient and poised. But the usual warmth was absent. The typical post-race decompression, even in frustration, was gone. No laughter. No shoulder claps. No toasts. Only guarded glances and murmured conversations. The penalty had changed everything. Not the time on the stopwatch, not the pace of the car, but the atmosphere. The energy. The belief. The reality was brutal. Hamilton had not started from the midfield because he lacked performance. The car, while still not a world beater, had shown glimpses of promise. The revised rear suspension offered better traction under load. The aero tweaks reduced drag on the straights. The telemetry wasn't glowing, but it wasn't concerning either. This wasn't about setup or strategy. It was about the 10 seconds. A penalty for a marginal infringement, debated across fan forums, talked about in tense meetings, parsed by legal teams and PR handlers. Was it a fair punishment? A necessary one? Or was it yet another ambiguous application of ever-shifting rules, the kind that have haunted Hamilton's career more than any rival? He had been here before, accused, penalized, analyzed to death while others were given the benefit of doubt. The whispers inside Ferrari's leadership team weren't about what had already happened. They were about what might happen next. Because when you bring in a driver like Lewis Hamilton, you're not just signing a champion. You're aligning yourself with an entire force of nature. He doesn't just drive fast, he expects systems to rise to his level. And when they don't, he doesn't explode, he isolates. And when he isolates, pressure builds. Pressure that can either forge diamonds or fracture foundations. Behind closed doors, Maranello's most senior engineers were already huddled. The data from Miami was being cross-checked. Simulations were being adjusted. Track-specific optimizations for Imola were pushed forward. The team spoke of recovering momentum, of targeting improvements, of operational clarity. But under the corporate language, the fear was clear. Had they already begun to lose him? Because Hamilton didn't come to Ferrari for a rebuild. He didn't leave the comfort of Mercedes, the consistency of Brackley, to become a development mule or a brand ambassador in red. He came to win, and win now. And penalties like this, however minor they may seem on paper, are symbolic. They represent the gap between what's promised and what's delivered, between myth and reality. The global reaction was instant. Twitter ignited. Reddit exploded. YouTube thumbnails were flooded with controversy, bias, robbed again. Influencers, analysts, and former drivers jumped in. Some defended the penalty. Others denounced it. But the sentiment was unified. When Lewis Hamilton is involved, nothing is ever neutral. Every second matters. Every decision echoes. Every silence roars. And as the post-race hours ticked by, the question wasn't just whether Ferrari would improve by Imola, it was whether Hamilton would still believe they could. In the Ferrari garage, the upgrade package remains technically viable. New floor geometry, lighter gearbox casing, a revised front wing, all of it designed to help balance the car's understeer tendencies in high-speed corners like Piratella and Variante Alta. But hardware can't fix trust. And that's what's starting to wear thin, not just between Hamilton and the FIA, but between Hamilton and the very project that was supposed to define his final chapter. Because this partnership was never just about performance. It was about legacy. About two giants, Hamilton and Ferrari, joining forces to create something mythical. Something unrepeatable. But mythology is fragile. And right now, it's cracking. The penalty didn't just push him down the grid. It pushed him back into the space he thought he'd left behind. The space where greatness is constantly questioned. Where wins come with asterisks. Where justice is delayed or denied. And when that space becomes familiar again, belief begins to fray. And still, he prepares. He trains. He studies. He sharpens. Not for the cameras, not for the headlines, but because that's who he is. A driver who can't stop chasing. A man who knows that the only way to answer politics is with performance. But the next race won't just test the car. It will test the architecture of this entire project. Will Ferrari give him the platform he needs, not just physically, but philosophically? Can they rise not just in downforce and deployment, but in decisiveness and protection? Will they guard him like the asset he is, or will they crumble under the weight of the red uniform and its decades of pressure? Imola will be more than a race. It will be a mirror. For Hamilton. For Ferrari. For Formula One itself. A mirror showing not who they pretend to be, but who they really are when the pressure closes in, when the noise gets louder, when the silence becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't over. It's just reaching the part of the story where the stakes outgrow the stopwatch. And if anyone thinks 10 seconds are all that matter, they're still not paying attention. Would you like the full Imola race sequence written with extreme emotional and tactical detail?